Okay, lovely. So I'm here today with my brother Luca, and we are gonna make some political reaction content. So we're gonna look at the video of Trump answering questions at the NABJ conference. That video went viral, I think, a couple of weeks ago or so, right? And just share our perspectives on it. And I'm curious to hear where you're coming from on this. And what I want to share is that I find that there is a general underlying conditioning in Democrat influenced side of American society to just I call it the orange man bad syndrome. Like that's how it lives in me. It's like everything Trump does is bad. Like that is just a general focus. That like bias is just constantly present whenever I see analysis of Trump's actions from anyone who's left leaning. And I think that just does a disservice for political discourse in the country. It's just horrible to have that constant bias because then you cannot objectively evaluate Trump, and thereby you cannot objectively evaluate all the options you have for the election. And it's gotten for me to a point where I'm just like so sick of looking at it and not speaking up, and that's kind of motivating me to create this content to just provide a more nuanced breakdown. I think it'll be an exercise for us to see where we agree, where we disagree, and it'll also be an exercise to develop our own nuance better, our own ability to hold nuance, and then present that. I think it would be a gift to present a nuanced analysis of these viral moments in the political cycle.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really excited for this. It's definitely edgy for me to talk about Trump not in pure hatred terms, because basically all my friends and family, like everyone I interact with, every time I've tried to bring up anything Trump related that's not pure hatred, not even like supporting, but just like maybe there's more nuance. Even people that are usually able to hold a lot of nuance and are open-minded, there's an immediate like projection of like angry white dude that's racist vibe. Which is interesting because in the two-party system, but inevitably both parties are like coalitions of lots of different types of people that all have different priorities, and almost no one is directly matched onto by either political party. It's like a coalition. There's a lot of compromise happening. And the same is true, with Trump. It's like a coalition of a lot of different types of people. But yeah, there's this weird, and ultimately not that weird when you really get into what's going on there, but this really strong programming that I also had for many, many years of like deep hatred of Trump and like disgust even, that's like, yeah, and then the more I started interacting with just like watching his actual like full-length interviews, the more I was like, I'm not necessarily agreeing with a lot of this stuff, but some of it makes sense, and it's breaking some frames in my mind that have been there for a while, and then I'm like, okay, interesting point. And also he just, as a person, says a lot of dumb shit for sure, and like kind of aggressive things, but he also says some things where I'm like, that feels like it's coming from a like loving place even, which is like crazy to say, it sounds weird to say, like Trump coming from a place of love. And he's very like brutish, I guess, in the way he expresses a lot of things. But yeah, once I started listening to him more, I was like, he seems to actually really care about the people that he's standing for. For better or worse in terms of how he's doing it. So yeah, it feels really exciting to like talk in this nuanced way. And I guess I want to say also, we're not like, I don't want to buy into the like, there's two options and which option do we choose? That's a small part, I would say, of what it is, but a lot of it is also like in terms of our personal life, like how do we relate to these big things going on? Like it feels for me more relevant in terms of like our lives, like our internal lives, our interpersonal lives, like how we relate to the systems around us, versus like, oh, do we choose Trump or do we choose Harris? Like that feels like almost a minor secondary issue. That's also very important, but like, our single vote is not having a huge impact, whereas what we do in our personal lives is like, for us.
Can you vote even?
Can you what?
Can you vote?
I can vote, yeah.
Oh, okay, I didn't realize that.
No, you can't even vote.
I can't even vote.
Yeah.
so it's a way, but it's like, the policies affect me strongly, and and I agree with you on that perspective of this is such the frame I've been holding is this is such a beautiful avenue to like find out who I am, because
right, yeah.
In terms of spiritual inner work, politics in a democratic society is the third in a way. Like you and me, we are connecting, and whatever is happening in the political scene is a third that affects both of us.
Right.
And then us talking about how that affects you, how that affects me, helps me get clearer and clearer on who I am, like what my values are, and also get to know you better, like who you are, who your values are. And there's a funny segue to, another aspect of conversations with a brother that I have been craving and desiring, that I've spoken to you once before, which is like there are a few occasions in my life where I have felt a strong brotherly connection with a human who has been intimate with a woman that I have been intimate with, and then the conversations there, and like, what is it that I see, what is it that you see, how are you affected, how am I affected, have just been so rich. It's like really broadened my perspective in this fascinating manner, and there's almost like a similar frame I'm holding. And I think this is true for everyone. Like politics affects everyone, and
that's interesting. Yeah, I really like that analogy.
It's like two humans can really stay steady, open, and talk about it. And they can learn so much about themselves, about the other, and then decide, where they align. And it's okay if at the end of that they don't align, because their values are different. But then there is less hatred in. According to that NBC model, if I know what values you're coming from, and they're like human values that you're coming from, I'm coming from some human values, and I see how your values lead you to choose something, my values lead me to choose something, and there's just less hatred between us.
Yeah, that feels like a huge step of like claiming independence and freedom for oneself and one's life. Is like relating to this third from your own authentic values, rather than like adopting the frame as it is and getting into the like hatred frame of like, the other side is like not even human, and my side is right on everything, which is the frame that system wants you to adopt. So we're all just in a state of conflict and like distracted from like a lot of other things in our own lives and in our society, and reclaiming that and being like with it in the fullness of our being and talking about it in that way. Yeah, both with you, the conversations we've had, and a few other people who've been open to me about that. It's been very like, a sense of like opening in those conversations.
Beautiful.
And grounding in my local life, or like my internal life, and where I am, who I am here, instead of this like getting sucked into this like weird vortex outside of me. So it's almost like by taking that vortex, which is inevitably there, and like kind of owning it in a way that okay, it's here, I have a relationship to it, everyone has some kind of relationship to it. So let's like take it into our own lives and talk about it in those terms. Feels like you're either choosing to do that or not to do that, because it's there anyways. So
Lovely. Let's start watching the video.
Let's do it.
Okay, showed up on the screen.
Mr. President, we so appreciate you giving us an hour of your time. I want to start by addressing the elephant in the room, sir. A lot of people did not think it was appropriate for you to be here today. You have pushed false claims about some of your rivals, from Nikki Haley to former President Barack Obama, saying that they were not born in the United States, which is not true. You have told 4 congresswomen of color who were American citizens to go back to where they came from. You have used words like animal and rabid to describe black district attorneys You've attacked black journalists, calling them a loser, saying the questions that they ask are, quote, stupid and racist. You've had dinner with a white supremacist at your Mar-a-Lago resort. So my question, sir, now that you are asking black supporters to vote for you, why should black voters trust you after you have used language like that?
I'm gonna pause it there, yeah.
Yeah, that's. I mean, there's a lot there in that question itself, right? And yeah, it'd be interesting to get. There's so much to unpack in that for me, and I'm curious to do that a little bit with you in conversation with
For
you.
sure, yeah.
And yeah, curious what was coming up for you as we were like listening to that question.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. I think one thing is to kind of, if I imagine myself being asked that question, I would like wither. Because it's very, yeah, it's like it kind of closes everything in a way, you know, it's like you're a horrible person. You shouldn't even be here. Why are you here? So yeah, loose of any of the content, I just want to kind of acknowledge that, which is a thing I've started doing more often, where I'm like imagining like if I was receiving a lot of the stuff that comes towards. I think there's like a dehumanization of Trump that happens, partially because he's so able to take things. So people kind of assume he's almost like invincible or something in terms of his like emotions, I guess. And he is very strong in that, but it is also like it's a lot to receive that. So yeah, that's not
Can
even
I
going into
double-click on
analysis,
that?
but that's just the thing that I think is like, it's helpful to like, it humanizes the whole thing instead of it being just about this like back and forth screaming, to also be like, hey, you're two humans that have emotions. And same for her, like there's a lot of emotions going on for her, probably like hearing him say these things like really affected her strongly, and she's like, this is my opportunity to like get revenge for all this pain that I felt, you know. So there's a lot of like really intense human emotional clashing happening there that feels like essential to like the dynamic of what's going on there, and sometimes gets buried underneath the pure verbal exchange.
Yeah, I want to double click on that specifically. Yeah, like, you know, when you were talking about imagining yourself in his place and receiving that question, one of the immediate things that came to my mind was, but Luca, you've never said horrible things to anyone, which, you know, he has objectively, like he said some like shitty things. So it's almost like different for you to receive it versus for him to receive it. It's like if you've had a history of being in integrity and like kind of cleaning up as you go, then you're less deserving of attacking questions. So like I want to hold
That's
that.
Interesting, yeah.
And holding that, I also want to say that what else though? You know, like this guy's running for. It's like there's two aspects. Like this guy's still running for the president of the U.S. You are going to be voting in the election beyond your past agony and like trauma with this human for the horrible things he said. Are you curious at all about what is he presenting?
Yeah. And
are you curious at all about if he has changed as a human being? You know, it's like, and that is that aspect which stands out to me, which almost like, in my perspective of having explored Trump since like my 2017, 2018 days of like, oh, Trump is the next Hitler, to now, my sense is that he has changed. My sense is that the MAGA movement itself has changed since when I encountered it in like 2017, 2018. Like there was no Vivek Ramaswamy in the MAGA movement in 2018. And in a way, it is actually changing at a rate that is much faster than what politics is used to. It is like changing. The way I see it, it is changing at the rate at which startups change. Because it is driven by capitalists, like business people who know how to adapt, know how to like evolve and change. And some of the criticism that I see leveled on, like the one criticism that comes to mind is like, you know, left-leaning media shitting on J.D. Vance for calling Trump Hitler, and now he's become his like
Right.
VP choice, and
Yeah.
and essentially looking at that and being like, oh, JD Vance is just licking Trump's feet, instead of being like, oh, maybe he did some more research and realized that Trump is not the next Hitler, and actually started agreeing. Like there is no space for that possibility of change, and that to me feels like very like, like a lot of these like mainstream journalists feel like wage laborers to me, and then they're just doing their job 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 or whatever, but they're not like agents of change really, like political establishment. Nancy Pelosi just like doing her job day by day, like earning stock, like figuring out what stocks to buy at the end of every month with the insider information that she has. But it's like they're not like, they don't, the rate of change is just very different. That was like standing out to me.
Yeah, I guess I will say, like, I think most politicians probably do have some desire to like help, and that's like their main, or like improve their society. That's their main driving force. And for sure, a lot of them also get corrupted, and there's a lot who are also maybe mainly in it for the power. But yeah, like I feel like both on both sides, like both for Trump, as I was saying earlier, like I do think he truly feels love for the people he's helping, and conversely for the other side, like I think most Democrats are like feeling love for the constituents that they're helping. Yeah, I feel like an important frame too, to acknowledge like both sides are coming, like their intentions are, I think, good, like in quotes maybe, like it's a bit more ambiguous, but I think for the most part good. But then in terms of how that gets manifested, like through this really complex, gnarly system, where to get power, like there's a lot of, less good flows that one has to go through. And also just in terms of like how people relate to the world, like I think a lot of these people don't have like space because they're so busy and they're so in it. There's not enough space necessarily to like really meditate on like, okay, like what would be the right next step right now for the society and for the people that I'm like devoted to. Which I think is a big thing that like kind of goes to this as well. Where like I think this journalist has really positive intentions, where she's like, she cares a lot about the black constituency, and she thinks Trump would be terrible for the black constituency clearly, and so she's like doing her best to from her position have an influence on avoiding this man getting into office. But it's such a like constant cycle of doing stuff, and then when you're not doing stuff, you're consuming stuff and reading stuff, and there's no like space really, which is a general issue with society at large. There's no space to sit down, and I think this is a big reason why a lot of people like don't go too deep on Trump, is there's just not enough space to like sit down and really like start with a trigger point or start with something and then kind of follow it through inside of yourself, and like and not just immediately jump to like doing research about it and like getting into YouTube rabbit holes or whatever, but just sitting with it and like letting it sink. And I think if that happened, there would be a lot of, it feels like a lot of this like is like maintained by not having that space, and if there was, it would like sink down somewhat.
The other thing that on that note, right, like her positive intention on behalf of the black community, the other thing that stood out to me in her question was this assumption of being the spokesperson for black people, which I get is a part of the trade in some ways. Journalists do that, but it's like it feels very gnarly sometimes to me, because prior to listening to black conservatives on YouTube, I was in that frame of mind of like any minority, it's like minorities all vote Democrat,
right?
Or if a minority is voting Trump, they have gone nuts, or they can't think for themselves. Like that was my mental framing. And questions like this, where she's like speaking on behalf of the black community, but only representing black Trump haters, really, right? Like in that questioning, it reinforced that framing even more. And then it's like a shock, and like I'll meet I don't know if I've shared this with you before, but I've often noticed that if I meet someone who's a white skinned person with a seemingly liberal orientation, I feel this assumption in how they speak to me
Yeah.
that I must hate Trump or something.
Right.
And it's like, it almost feels like boundary work for me to be like, hey, hang on, like you're projecting something on me and simultaneously like looking down on me as like the downtrodden minority or something, and it just feels icky.
Yeah, that reminds me of John McWhorter, who I think is a professor at Columbia. And he has a whole book and does a lot of interviews. He's black, about how wokeism is really bad for black people actually, and like victimizes them in a way that like severely degrades their actual like quality of life and their ability to pursue opportunities, and that it's reinforcing racism, and like maintaining the like class divide basically. And if people are interested, I'll leave it to them to like look more into that. I didn't really do his full argument justice there. But yeah, when I first saw a video of his, it was really interesting for me to be like, oh, like here's a black person who is pushing back against wokeism on behalf of the black community and the well-being of the black community. And there's also a Democratic senator who just like a week or two ago, former Democratic senator, I think she's left the Senate in 2014. I forget her name. Maybe we could look it up.
Sweet.
Yeah. So we found the source here. Yeah. So Nina Turner, who's a former Democratic senator, is just talking about why black men are moving away from the Democrats because the party emasculates them, and she's a progressive activist. So she's not like supporting that move necessarily, but just talking about it.
This is interesting actually, because the one thing I did notice in my exploration of black conservatives is that other than Candace Owens, it's mostly been black men, at least the YouTubers that I've seen. And this is an interesting point that she makes about the party's elevation of black women as mothers of the movement alienates certain group, namely black men. And there is that angle of I think I've shared this with you before, around we both spoke about kind of the disgust reaction that we feel about Trump, or we have felt about Trump as an individual. And it really, when I look at Trump, it really creates a sense of disgust from my own sexual trauma wounds. And there is, he's a known sexual predator who has not apologized. It doesn't seem like that's on his radar at all, to like account for ways in which he crossed sexual boundaries of women or just was horrible to women. And my sense is that liberal women, like women who are stepping into their sovereignty of their sexual liberation, if you frame it that way, find that so utterly disgusting that it's like if I had raped you and now I'm coming to you and proposing something that I want to do in the neighborhood that will help with the greenery. You're just gonna be like, fuck you. Like, why would you? It's like it will be difficult for you to like listen to anything else till I like acknowledge that I have crossed your boundaries. And that is my sense of the dynamic, like the never Trump women in the country who are, and in my sense, these women are the archetype of women kind of stepping into their sexual sovereignty. Like that is where they get stuck in being able to see Trump as something more. Like he is that, yes, and he's something more, but and I'm curious to like it kind of
that makes a ton of sense to me. Like I totally understand that reaction. I was reading some statistics the other day. Among single women, 72% are Democrat and 24, I think, are Republican. And in all other demographics, for the most part, it's like 50 Republican, 45 Democrat. And the article was saying, like, loose of single women, the U.S. is like solidly Republican as a country in other demographics. Yeah, which is, I think, goes to this where like it's not just about the personality. I think it's also policy related, that massive like imbalance in that demographic between the parties. But I think a lot of it definitely has to do with like the energy you're talking about, and that for a lot of women, like the current stage for themselves and in society is this like liberation and independence and like working through a lot of the trauma of having been repressed in various ways. And then Trump is like the antithesis to that in many ways, or he is presented as the antithesis. Whether he is or not is another question, which I actually don't exactly know. It's very complicated, but so that reaction makes a ton of sense. And then I can see like, and I think a lot of the policies are important, but a lot of what the energy around Trump in this election, I feel like, is about the core energetics of like the U.S. as a society. Like, what is the core grounding that we're in energetically? And I think that key locus is one of the key aspects of that. And I have a lot of empathy for that response, honestly, as a single woman.
I'm just gonna pull up that video again.
Word, yeah.
I lost it.
Or not as a single woman myself. If I were a single woman.
Okay, here it is.
Well, first of all, I don't think...
what was I going to say? No, never mind. Let's just watch it, yeah. No, I forgot. I forgot.
Okay, come back.
I've ever been asked a question so in such a horrible manner. First question. You don't even say, hello, how are you? Are you with ABC? Because I think they're a fake news network, a terrible network. And
yeah, I think the audience reaction here is fascinating.
It is.
Because it's all black people, as far as I understand, at least. So, it's kind of unexpected in a way.
It was unexpected for me too. Like I mean, not that it was unexpected for me. I was just noticing the cheering from the audience, just given the phrasing of her question, where she was presenting herself as like the spokesperson of all black people, and why should black people vote for you because you have done such horrible things to black people.
Yeah.
In that, if one has that frame, then I'm curious what she thinks of black people cheering for what he's saying. It's like, how does she make sense of that?
Yeah,
maybe she looks at them as like lunatics or something, or like not the intelligent black people, or like black people who actually care about, it's like what's that fallacy, the Scotsman, no true Scotsman fallacy. Have you heard of it?
No.
It's like the no true Scotsman fallacy is basically like, let's say you make a statement like, no Scottish person ever drinks whiskey, and I tell you, yo, I'm Scottish and I drink whiskey. Then you go, no true Scotsman ever drinks whiskey.
Totally,
it's like it's a way of like sticking to the bias that you have and just rejecting new information.
Right, yeah, for sure. I think that's also with the whole basket of deplorable stuff back in the Hillary Clinton days.
Say more.
That was where like Hillary Clinton said like everyone voting for Trump is like that's the basket of deplorables in the U.S., which is I think a similar thing where you have this cognitive dissonance of like, holy shit, why are so many people into this person who seems to me like the antithesis of American values? So then you're like, oh, but they're not true, you know, Americans, or they're not true, they're not connected to love, or they hate everyone, or they're racist, or you put some label on them that makes them like otherizes them completely from where you're at, so they're like not even in the same world as you, which then resolves that cognitive dissonance. But I think it's a big thing. That was for me as well. When he got elected, I was like, what? Like after everything he said, like what's going on here? It took me many years even after that before I even started touching this whole area without just like the hatred frame. But yeah, there's like that many people like voting for him is like, it's a big thing, you know what I mean? Like it's weirder to just label all those people like horrible people or crazy people or something than to just be like, okay, maybe there's like something going on here that's different from my frame on reality. And maybe these people are like relating to the world similarly to me on a very fundamental level.
Mm.
Like they care about issues that are really important to them and their family
Mm-hmm.
and their like tribe and stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's like they reach a very different conclusion,
Right.
but they're coming at it from a similar
Or-
like essential energy.
Or some people at least reach that, they might be able to reach that place of, oh, these people care about their family, but then they layer on top of it, but they are unable to think for themselves or something. Like they are making choices that are bad for them or something.
Yeah.
That becomes like the next piece in some ways, almost of like Trump is duping them. It's
Right.
like, and in that statement, Trump is duping them is a subtle assumption that they are unable to assess who is duping them or not. It's
Right.
like they don't see it because they are probably dumb. They don't see,
Yeah,
like there's like a subtle underlying
Yeah.
elitist looking down.
Right. And vice versa too. Like it's the exact same in the other direction. Like
Right.
I'm sure you've encountered this in
Yeah.
videos you've watched where there's the same attitude towards Democrats,
Right.
like they're being duped, they're dumb,
Right.
they're like sucked into the system. So
Yeah.
I think it's more that it's not like any side is doing this. It's like
Right.
it's part of the dynamic of the overall
Yeah.
like aggression
Interesting.
between these sides.
Yeah, interesting. As you say that, where I stand right now, I have some of that in me where when I, like, if I hear right now, if I'm talking to someone and if I hear them say, I'm gonna vote for Kamala Harris, my instinctive judgment of that person is that you are less intelligent than I or something. Like I carry that at the moment, and I'm pretty sure I carried that towards like Trump voters in 2016.
Right. Yeah.
So it's interesting to hear.
Yeah, I think it's very intrinsic to the system. It also comes to this point. I was talking with a friend the other day, and we were talking about the overall political system. He's Democratic leaning. I wouldn't say I'm Republican leaning, but I think in the current configuration, like makes a little more sense. But yeah, so we were talking about it, and he was saying like the political system is built on like focusing on cheap issues that like donors are okay with, basically. So instead of focusing on like things that would actually deeply shift the overall dynamics of the system.
That's what he said.
Yeah, that's what he was. We were
Interesting.
both talking about this. Instead of focusing on issues that actually deeply shift the dynamics of the system,
Yeah.
you focus on issues that are like you can do a lot of things on that issue without touching the system's dynamics. So I feel like identity politics is a lot of, or just the culture wars in general, like on both sides.
But he was because that is a critique I have of the talking points I often hear on the Democrat side, like on the left. The critique being that it's this band-aid fixes for everything without taking like the holistic systemic picture in mind. So it's interesting to hear, like a left-leaning person have that, see that.
Yeah.
But he believes that's the case with like Republicans too.
With both parties,
With
yeah.
both
And I think a lot of it is like about sincerity. I think is maybe the key thing, because he and many other people think Trump is not sincere and is a liar.
Yeah.
And so whatever he says, like even if he were to say something, it was like, oh, that's because for what he was saying is like, okay, I buy that Trump has like broken a lot of frames that were kind of fucked up in a certain way, but I don't trust him to follow up on anything. So, okay, cool, he broke some frames, but when he gets in power, and he was in power, he just does things that benefit the elite, and he's not sincere. And then a lot of Trump supporters are in the other direction, where they're like, the Democrats aren't sincere, and they're saying all these great things about like healing societies, like racist divides, and like progressivism, but they're not sincere about it, and they're just after power, and they're manipulating people in order to like maintain the power of corporations. So it feels like the key question is like which side is like one of the key questions. Which side is sincere? Both sides are saying stuff about change, but who is actually sincere? Or are they both not sincere? Which is there's a lot of people who just tune out of the whole thing because both sides are insincere. And the true locus of change is elsewhere.
Have you looked at Trump's record in his first term to kind of, because I have encountered this argument too, like I was discussing with a left-leaning friend of mine about wanting to look through Agenda 47, and he's like, what even is the point? Trump just lies about everything.
Right, exactly.
So then
sincerity thing.
But then I'm like, okay, but if one were to look through his record in the first term, given what he's saying, if he has truly lied about everything, like that should show up in the actions he took in his first term.
Right.
And I'm curious if you have like done research like that about his like first term and what he accomplished, like what things he passed through.
Not
Okay.
deeply enough to be able to speak on it
Okay.
authoritatively. I know he did quite a few things that he promised in any case,
Yeah.
but I don't know like the percentage,
Mhm.
and I don't I don't know much about what it was he was promising necessarily,
Mhm.
except the really like the wall, these big things. But otherwise, I wasn't super engaged in like knowing what he was even promising because I was focused on the same as everyone else, just focused on him being a piece of shit. So I didn't even wasn't really focusing. So, but that'd be interesting to do sometime maybe.
Yeah.
I'm pretty curious too, actually.
Yeah,
'cause I
the
have no idea.
piece that does stand out to me on that, and I'm noticing right now that this is, I'm connecting to a value for myself as I'm sitting with this inquiry, is his orientation towards like global peace or something.
That one is interesting, yeah,
And
sure.
he claims that no new wars were started during his term, which feels right just based on how I've tracked global news. Like I won't be, I'd be curious to actually dig in but it feels right because I don't remember.
I think that's right, yeah.
Right, and
Yeah.
then
At least ones that America is involved in or
Yeah.
instigating. Yeah, I'm sure there were some civil wars in small countries and stuff. But that's
Yeah.
different.
and then the other thing in that global peace domains that stands out to me is the extinguishing of ISIS, which I remember like back in 2015, 2016, I remember it feeling like a major existential threat. Like that was
Yeah.
it was pretty wild at the
Yeah.
rate at which, and ISIS is no longer on the scene, and
Yeah.
he was directly responsible for. It's like there's this like hilarious video that comes to my mind of like that shows Obama on one end, talking about announcing the death of Bin Laden,
Mhm.
and Trump on the other. It plays one at a time, and Trump on the other side talking about the death of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi.
Mhm.
And it's just a very hilarious contrast because Obama is so refined in his speech and so eloquent, and like
Yeah.
Trump is, I think you referenced that earlier, like he has a brutish energy to how he talks,
Yeah.
and that is like the other thing that I've personally gotten past in a way, like because he is, and there was a frame that someone communicated to me, like he's think of him as a Long Island New Yorker.
Right.
And the
yeah.
moment I like sit with that,
Right. Mhm. Yeah.
given the time I've spent in New York, and there's like people who'll be like, New Yorkers are so rude, and they just get turned off by them. But then if you like really sit with the energy of New York, you understand that rudeness is shallow. It's like just at the top layer, and underneath there is a lot of heart and hustle and like hard work. That's like
Right.
the energy of New York, and
Yeah.
some people get it. Like New York itself is very polarizing.
Yeah.
People who get stuck on the rudeness of New Yorkers just never get to see the heart. But then if you like really see the heart underneath it, just
Mhm.
people identify. Like I identify deeply as being New Yorker somewhere deep inside.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, what you said about getting past it or getting through it feels really important. The brutishness of like, I think that was a big thing for me, where it was like the whole frame on Trump to some extent, and this is kind of like over simplifying it in a way, but it's a bit like casting someone for a fashion show. Like, do they talk correctly? Do they present themselves correctly? Or casting someone for a movie role. And even in her question, to some extent, that's showing up, where it's like, has he said the correct things? And to some extent, that is actually important, in the presidential role. So it's not like that's not at all important. But if it's like that's the only kind of main thing that everyone is talking about. And then there's other components that are important to the role of president, such as, foreign policy is a big one. Like, can this person relate to foreign leaders in a way that's beneficial for America and keeps peace? And we can talk about that in more detail some other time, but I feel like Trump's record there is super strong relative to the Democratic record. And that's not about being a nice person necessarily. There's other factors that go into that. And then also just like policies, like what are their policies? And so their how they present themselves is an important component. It's not like irrelevant, but it's one of many. And I feel like there's this thing that's happened where like this one has been kind of just thrown over all the other ones as a blanket. to like hide all of these other ones, and so no one even, like you were saying, like most people don't even know what Agenda 47 is or think like this Project 2025 stuff, which Trump has said like 20 times now he has no affiliation with and thinks is bullshit, but people keep throwing that. So it feels like and I only read Agenda 47 like a week or two ago for the first time, and I was really shocked actually. It was very different from how he speaks in rallies, which is very like brutish, but the agenda itself is like a very like well-crafted policy document. There I was like, yeah, a lot of these policies like are pretty interesting and make sense, and some of them don't for me personally.
That'd be a fun thing to get into.
Yeah, but that feels really important, is to acknowledge like, yes, this part in many ways he's like not a good candidate as in terms of the way he presents himself. But
I don't even know if I would agree with that.
I'm not saying I necessarily agree with that. I partially agree with that, but that is like I think the frame most people have in relation to him, and that I used to have, and that the media has, and that being thrown out over as a blanket. So I think it's really valuable to like peel that blanket and be like, this is important to me, and also these other things for this role are really important. And even though everyone around me is telling me that this is the most important thing, and all of these other things like don't even matter because of how horrible this one is, I'm gonna choose to like peel that one back and be like, okay, what about his ability to be a leader in terms of the global economy and the global world order, and his actual domestic policies in and of themselves. And I mean, I could go on forever about that. There's a lot to say about it, but it's really interesting to notice the lack of attention on that, and when there is attention on it, it's like totally like wrong usually. Like the abortion stuff, where people think he wants to ban abortion, but he actually would veto an abortion ban, and it's about putting power back to the states. So that's a whole other conversation. And Project 25 versus Agenda 47, which are totally different. It's just shocking in a way how like the policy side gets basically no attention. And maybe people still would disagree with the policy side, but you have like that conversation isn't even happening for the most part.
I'm noticing we are at like 3, and we should. I think this is a good start, and there is so much more to explore. Like you said,
we got 1 minute.
Say again?
Literally 1 minute. He hasn't even said anything.
I mean, there is so much here.
So much,
there is clearly a lot here, and I'm not surprised that we did not get through much of the interview, because again, there is just so much here to unpack, and I feel like this video was just like almost bullet pointing different things to dive in, and there is almost like a video each we could create on each of these pieces. Like even like pushing power back to the states is something that I don't think most people get what that means.
It took me a while to understand that that's Trump's like main thing, is just the federal, like where does responsibility lie between federal, state, and individual. Like
it's like when people I suspect, because of just a lack of understanding of what it means to have a federal government and government structures, when people hear pushing power back to the states, they hear ban, like no abortion access or something, and it will be that way. Like if power is pushed back to the states, like there will probably be some states that ban abortion outright.
There have been. There's a lot of states have already voted. But interestingly, a lot of the states that people expected would ban it actually didn't ban it.
Really? Like which one?
Either Oklahoma or one of the states in that area. I forget which one it was. Or Alabama. No. Maybe Alabama or Oklahoma. I just remember J.D. Vance was saying at one point, he was like, yeah, like this state that everyone thought would ban it didn't ban it. And he was like, I'm totally okay with that because they chose that, even though I personally am not in favor of abortion. But what I'm more in favor of is the people voting for it within their states.
Yeah, abortion is like a whole thing I actually want to get into. Like, there's so much there, so much to unpack.
Yeah, I guess I just want to say also, there's also arguments for federal abortion, pro-abortion legislation, in the same way with like civil rights with slavery. I do see it kind of depends. Just like, is abortion important enough as a human right that it's worth going to war for? That's almost maybe like the metric I would use. Like slavery is important enough to ban, to go to war for. So it makes sense that the federal government is like coercively forcing that upon the states. So, but it's like, the question there is, it's just about like the degree of like the importance of this issue human rights wise, and the extent to which you think like individual freedom and state power is important. So It's just like levers, and different people will land at different places.
Yeah.
Just to say that I understand from that perspective why some people think a federal pro-abortion law does make sense even in a federal government situation.
And then again, there is a spectrum there of like banning sponsored by state, available by private, like not sponsored by state, so available at cost, you know.
Right.
There's like a whole spectrum there. And then there is a spectrum on like at what stage of the pregnancy. So there are just many levers there, right? It's like when you say an abortion ban, are you talking about blanket? Are you saying after eighth month? Are you talking after 5th month, 4th month?
Yeah.
So there's just so much there to unpack and talk about what you agree with, what you disagree with. And I'll also note that there is, you know, fear here to even speak about this as a man.
Right.
Like for me, there is a fear there to just speak about it as a man. And I think it is healthy to be able to talk about it, because even though men don't carry the baby, like men are a part of the equation of like, you know, bringing life forth. So it is healthy to just speak about it and share our perspective, share what we don't know, and be able to listen to women sharing, you know, their direct perspectives. And
I will say in regards to that, I had a conversation once with a friend of mine who was actually pro-abortion ban, which was like a totally shocking conversation, because I just assumed like most women were like you know, like pro-abortion, and so she was anti-abortion, and she had a whole argument about the sanctity of life and stuff. And she was like a friend of mine, so it wasn't like a stranger or anything, but that was really like a mind kind of like for me of like, oh, like there's nuance to this, I guess. And I'm like, on abortion itself, it feels like so intense and complex of an issue. Like I don't know if I have an opinion on it really, or I can see a lot of different opinions making sense. But for me, it's more about the thing that for me personally is relevant is like, where is power between federal, state, and individual? That feels really important, and abortion feels like an essential issue. In part also because of that, because of the downstream implications of like, okay, if this is federal or if this is state, that like has downstream implications for a lot of other different issues. Are those federal or are those state? So it feels like in a way it's like a little bit, in a way, existential. Maybe that's a bit too strong of a word, but it's quite important where that ends up being put, that power. And like, where's that limit I was talking about? Like, okay, so civil rights, we all agree, like anti-slavery is a federal coercive thing because that's important enough. And abortion feels like it's like on that edge, and which side it is says a lot about like where is the limit of federal coercive power to enforce human rights versus like state power and individual power of like independent determination of life.
And even the question of human rights is split in abortion, right? It's like both sides are saying
that's true. That's actually
it's a human right question, right? It's like
that's a good point.
It's like right of the unborn fetus versus right of the woman carrying it. So there's just so much more nuance there.
And like who decides, then it gets complicated as well. Like what is a human right and what is not. And it's a gnarly issue.
I think we should pause here for today. But this was lovely. Thank you for joining. Fun exercise, and there is more on this. It'll be fun.
A lot more. I mean, literally, Trump hasn't even said any words. We got to the audience clapping.
Yeah. Cool.